Because the good thing about the spenders, is the fact they're willing to use money. Because money is meant to be used. But they often they usually abuse it rather than use it, right? It's easy come, easy go. And that's why, really 75% of business owners are actually usually in the spender category, while about 75% of employees are savers, right?
Sure.
And so, because obviously there's a different mentality, obviously business owners want to make more money. So the spenders get a bad rap for that, but they're also willing to use money to get a return, which is good. They just have to be wise with it, which is what a saver does. A saver will overthink in many cases and usually go overboard to the point they say they're conservative, but really they're just comfortable savers. They're what savers are, right? They're not investors. They're not or conservative investors. They're comfortable savers because they do what the masses do.
You're listening to the Accredited Investors Only podcast, presented by Accredited Life.
Awesome, Chris. Welcome to the show. How you feeling today?
Feeling pretty well, Peter. How you doing, man?
Oh, I am doing very well. So you were talking about traveling at all. Have you been anywhere interesting lately, or was that business or pleasure or a little bit of both?
Well, the last weekend was Vegas, and I was turning it into business, because it was more of a marathon I was running there. And but I got onto a show. You might know the Ryan Pineda show.
Oh yeah, I've heard the name, definitely.
Yeah, so Ryan Pineda has been a friend of mine for a while, and we finally, said, all right, got to his team, connected with them, and said, let's get on the show, let's do this together, and so they finally agreed. They're like, all right, when do you want to do it? I was like, well, could you do it this weekend? Can you do it like on the Monday after this weekend? And they said, well, yeah, we could. I'm like, perfect, which worked out great because I ran a marathon there, and then the next day got on the Ryan Pineda show, and then drove back to Utah.
There you go. Okay, so you drove. I was going to say Utah and Nevada, not too far from each other, right?
Yeah, for me, it's like 4.5 to 5 hour drive, which
Terrible.
is ironic because I have to drive an hour to Salt Lake Airport, wait there, fly, I might as well just drive and enjoy my time.
I know what you mean. I'm the kind of guy where it's like, as long as I'm moving in the right direction, I'm happy, where it's like you're sitting at the airport and twiddling your thumbs, that kind of thing. It gets frustrating. And then the chances of losing your bag is always just it's like hovering over you, it's like a wild thing. So before we get into everything, Chris, just introduce yourself to the audience in your own words.
Yeah, so obviously Chris Miles, I'm known as the anti-financial advisor and cash flow expert. Why? Because actually about over 20 years ago, I used to be a financial advisor, like the mainstream one that you probably would hate, right? I was the guy that was the salesman in a suit, thinking I was somebody who was like a money expert, but really I wasn't. And the whole reason I even got into it, because, I was raised by, parents that taught me good values. My mom taught me to follow my dreams. My dad taught me to work hard. Your word is your bond. Don't half-ass anything, that kind of stuff. And, but the one thing they also talked about was about money, but not in a good way. It was like money was always scarce. There's never enough. What do you think I am, made of money? We can't afford this. Not, money doesn't grow on trees, those kind of things you hear growing up, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I want to have, something better in my life. I want to lead a different life than what they had. I didn't want to live a life of scarcity. And especially because I would hear my dad say that his job would literally kill him. He's like, I'm going to die from the stress. He'd already had heart attacks and strokes by his 40s and 50s. So I was like, I want to give him his life back. If I can learn about this money, one, it can help me, but two, it can help him maybe have a little bit more hope of a future. And so I got into that. And then 4 years into being a financial advisor. So I was in for quite a while, especially because most financial advisors never make it past the 2-year mark. But I was in there 4 years, and then he says, well, when are you going to advise me? So I sit down with him at his kitchen table, the same one he taught me about, be cheap with your money, save everything, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then I'm looking at his finances, and the guy stuffed money in his 401k, got the match and everything, just like every good boy and little girl should have.
Sure.
He paid off his debt, including his mortgage. He did that mortgage paid off in 18 years. So he was proud of that, totally debt free. He was like Dave Ramsey's dream come true, right?
Yeah, wherever you said that was the person that came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He probably taught Dave Ramsey everything Dave Ramsey knows, because, he'd be like Dave Ramsey's little brother. And so my dad did all that stuff. And I said, okay, Dad, you're 61 years old. If you want to retire today, you better hope you die in about 5 or 6 years, because that's when you're going to run out of money.
Wow.
It's like, okay, that's not what I was hoping to hear from you. This is why I want you to sit with me. And I was like, he's like, well, what do? I don't know. You did everything right. You did everything by the book, right? So mean, I could try to put you in this mutual fund or this annuity or that, but the truth is, like, I can't guarantee the market's always going to go up. And like, you got equity in your house, but we don't want to cash out the equity and throw it in the stock market because, well, legally we can't. So, I don't know what to do. And so I was bugged by that. And I remember I went back to Utah. This is in Oregon. I grew up in Oregon. So I flew back to Utah. And for weeks, I was just bugged by the situation because he was my inspiration. And look, my inspiration couldn't even retire. And it was just a few weeks later, I reached out to a friend who I hired to be a financial advisor, but then left to do this crazy thing called real estate investing. And so I called him up, wish him Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, that kind of thing. And he's like, and I was like, well, how are things going? He's like, man, my life is amazing right now. My dad and I have partnered on some real estate deals, and we've now doubled his income as a professor at the local university. I said, wait a minute. You've only been doing this like 4 or 5 months. That's too good to be true. There's no way that's possible.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm doing it, man. And then finally, he just challenged me. He's like, Chris, how many of your clients are really, truly financially free where they don't worry about money? Well, none. I mean, they all worry about money. Even the retired ones worry about, they watch CNN. If you watch CNN, you're going to think the sky's falling every day, right? So, everybody's scared right now. He's like, okay, well, how about this? How many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not off the commissions you're earning from the assets you have, but actually doing the investments you've been recommending? As I was really honestly thinking about the answer to that question, and there's about 100 people in our office, I was like, well, I know there's guys who've been working here since the late 1970s. They don't seem like they're quitting anytime soon. So I was like, done?
Wow.
And he said, well, there's your problem.
Yeah.
Well, give me the answer. I won't give you the answer. You just got done arguing with me that stocks are better than real estate. I'm like, well, come on, give me something. Like, all right, if you're really serious, go read this book called Who Took My Money by Robert Kiyosaki. It's a lesser known rich dad book.
Yeah.
Pretty much just says mutual funds suck. And then he's like, and go listen to this AM talk radio show with these 2 real estate investors. So I started to listen to it. And I started like really like binging on it, right? Because they were like 2 hours every morning. I even rearranged my whole schedule so I could be listening to that show for 2 hours every weekday morning. And the crazy thing is they hardly even talked about strategy. They were talking more about like founding fathers and principles and of abundance and scarcity and all that kind of stuff, right? And more their mindset and the principles that go behind wealth creation. And then their whole platform was just, talking about that to then do real estate investing. And they were mostly like, more flippers. They weren't even fix and flippers. They were just flippers because this is 2005, 2006, right? So this is like doing real estate in 2021, so naturally I was, I got sucked in. And finally, a few months later, I had to make a choice. I was like, all right, either I keep doing what I'm doing, put my blinders on and just keep, advising people because that's what my paycheck says to do.
Yeah.
Or 2, I bail and keep my integrity intact. So I chose the latter. I bailed. I was like, I'm going to quit being a financial advisor. I'll never teach about money again. Right. Which is why we're on the show, because I'll never want to teach about money. But that was my thing. I was like, I'll just be a mortgage broker. I'll teach ballroom dancing on the side and maybe do a little stock trading. And that's pretty much what I did for a while. But I had to learn why these guys were financially free, doing real estate in their 20s and 30s. And so eventually I started doing the same stuff. Like I turned my first starter home into a rental. It was a very slow burr, a 3-year burr in that case, because I wouldn't even think about doing it as a rental for a while. But I turned that into a rental, and even I actually sold it to an investor at full appraisal, leased it back, and then I subleased it to somebody else so I could strip all my equity out and then get a rental out of it.
Wow.
And then I even, even from there too, I even was doing things like lending. Hard money lending was like awesome back then. It was like paying you 2 or 3% a month, So
wow.
Not what you get nowadays. This is why obviously there's a bubble because it was just ridiculous numbers. But I was able to retire when I was 28, almost 29 years old. Again, like not even realizing it would be that easy because it was all about that passive income, that cash flow versus the accumulation mindset that I was teaching about mutual funds, which is you live on maybe 3% a year, right? Like that's, the whole 4% rule is debunked. That thing's so old hat, but, and it's amazing. There's still people out there teaching this 4% rule, even the FIRE movement. It's like, dude, you guys are so screwed up. Like we questioned that 20 years ago, even as financial advisors, and you guys are still teaching that like it's gospel, even though it was created back in 1976, right by the time that we were taking off the gold standard. And it was when people lived less, they weren't living as long. So 3% is more like the rule. So if you're like a millionaire, they live on 30,000 a year. That's ridiculous, So to all of a sudden have enough cash flow coming in that was work optional, I could work because I want to, not because I have to. It was shocking. And so, anyways, so I did that. There's a whole aspect of my story where 2007 and 8 and 9 hit, and then I went from millionaire to upside down millionaire. Had to dig out of that debt hole and without filing for bankruptcy, but I was able to dig out of it eventually and was able to retire the second time in 2016, at the end of that year. And so I had to do it twice, to essentially be like what you guys are, passive investors, right? And I wasn't even accredited for part of that time because I was so broke, So I had to figure out a way to get creative and find ways to dig out of that hole and do it again. And that's really what I teach even on my Money Ripples podcast, is much like what you're promoting here too, which is, financial freedom, becoming work optional, creating that passive income and really fighting against, financial advising is really what I'm doing, right? That's why I'm an anti-financial advisor, because the stuff they teach you does not work. It's been proven not to work for years, yet everybody teaches it like it's gospel.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, 99% of people really aren't feeling confident when they get to retirement.
Yeah, I was very fortunate, at my first job to have a mentor there that really turned me on to the questions they ask financial advisors and things like that. What are they investing in, and what kind of financial freedom, or I like what you're saying with work optional. Because I'm the kind of person, and a lot of, I think real estate investors are, especially active investors, they're not necessarily going to feel comfortable just sitting on a beach all day, right? Or at the golf course all day or something like that. So, but you want to have the choice, especially sometimes life, things come up where with health issues, family issues and stuff like that, where sometimes you can't work. You have to, there's other things that are more important at certain times of your life. And also I love the option though, because I think sometimes I think the financial freedom part of real estate and passive investing can be overplayed to a certain degree. And especially the lifestyle aspect of it, because it's like for somebody like myself, like I enjoy working. I want to be working. I don't even necessarily, of course it's a job, right? And there's always tasks that you don't want to do or something like that, or tasks you enjoy more than others, right? That kind of thing. But this is something where like, God, I could see myself doing this until I was, 100 years old. And it's just, why would I want to retire? And I've met a lot of people like that. And that's kind of a theme that's come up in our show, with past interviews. Like there's people, I just interviewed somebody the other day, like just super passionate about real estate investing. Yeah. Just really enjoying it. And then I've talked to other people where it's just a means to an end. There's not a passion there. And to each their own, right? And if it's getting you what you want, then that's great. But I love people that are passionate in it and they enjoy what they're doing. It's just going to make life so much better in a lot of ways. What did you do for your dad? So when you kind of were finding the financial freedom there, how did you help your dad? Because it sounded like he needed to he needed to think a little differently, right?
He did. It's tough because he was so ingrained in that saver mentality, and
Sure.
that's what I talk about. There's a spender mentality, saver mentality, but the only one that really works is the steward mentality, right?
Hmm.
And the spenders always get a bad rap, but a lot of people don't rip on the savers, right? And I don't mean like in a horrible way, but really letting people know that a saver mentality is still scarcity, and you can never financially prosper in scarcity. Right? You have to have an abundance mindset. You have to be able to look at money in a healthy way. Savers, they can never pay off debt fast enough. They can never save enough money. They end up hoarding money. Then it's just never enough, right? So they just keep in the habit of hoarding. And so they never experience real freedom, no real financial freedom. They're like our model clients, right? They're the accredited investors that are like the ones that say, I've got all this cash and nothing to show for it, right? It's like, yeah, great. I'm worth $3 million. But my passive income is zero. Like that's not cool. My financial advisor sucks, that kind of thing. And so that was where my dad is. Very much that ingrained depression mentality.
Sure.
And so trying to teach him stewardship was really difficult. And even to this day, he actually never thought he'd make it to age 70. He now just turned 80 a few months ago.
Nice.
So he's literally been stretching his dollar as long as he could. He ended up working into his 70s. So it was pretty tough. So he kind of listens, he'll occasionally watch some of my interviews or my podcasts and be like, do you think I should do it? I'm like, you could, You definitely could. And then that's the last I hear. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, you're definitely painting a good picture of it. It's and I talk a lot about this, like with the accredited life, what presents, this podcast and all, and it's just foundational. It's just like what did you grow up with? Because that's going to play such a big role, and I think you have to understand that. And sometimes, yeah, you can just be a little too far gone. You know what I mean? And not everything is right for every person at the end of the day, right? You know what I mean? So some people, if that's what helps them sleep at night, you know what I mean, and that's what they're going to feel comfortable with, then God bless them. You know what I mean? You got to do what you want, what you feel comfortable with, and if they did something else and they'd be up worried and this and that, you know what I mean, then maybe it's not worth it, right? You know what I mean? There's that balance.
that's right.
So Chris, tell me about how you work with investors. What options do you have? I'm just if an investor comes to you, what's the journey with you look like and all?
Yeah, so we're totally hands off. Like we don't ever raise any capital. We don't have any investments ourselves. We work more as consultants,
Okay.
so we work more in trying to help people really match make them a little bit more, right? Like
Mm.
help them strategize their finances and what could be used. I always talk about get lean, get liquid, and get out. Get lean means definitely be a wise steward of your money. Figure out like don't get cheap, don't live on rice and beans, all that kind of crap, right? But definitely like figure out like how do I, you know, keep my expenses and my income, how do I keep that a good track of what's going on and a healthy thing of that. And then get liquid means how do we get your money out of prison? Yeah, you ever noticed that everything a financial advisor teaches you or everything in financial education, which of course all comes down from the same source, which are like the financial institutions that want you to lock up your money with them, banks,
Sure.
Merrill Lynch's of the world and everybody else, right? They want you to lock the money up with them while they make their guaranteed fees.
Yeah.
And so getting people to get liquid because they tell you lock up your money in 401ks and IRAs, and then you're not supposed to touch them until you're at least 59 and a half. They tell you lock up your money in equity in a house, which I made that mistake in 2007 because I watched all my equity disappear,
Mm.
because I locked it up thinking I could just always cash out refi whenever I want. And then the banks changed their mind and says, no, we don't like cash out refis anymore.
Sure.
So, I mean, all that stuff. So trying to get that money like free and liquid available to then get it out to invest.
Mm.
And it really depends on their goals and their timelines and what they're trying to do. Because I get some people, they almost like do syndications like they're throwing spaghetti on a wall. Like
Sure.
just randomly picking syndication because they thought the person sounded cool,
Yeah.
or whatever it might be. Maybe they heard you on a podcast like this one or something like that. And they're like, oh, that sounds good. It sounds exciting. Yeah, I don't really understand a lot of it, but it seems to be good enough, and
Sure.
and they just pick it. But there's no rhyme or reason. There's no real strategy. And I find, especially with dentists and doctors all the time, I work with a lot of dentists and whatnot. And a lot of times they're just picking random syndications that they put money into just because they trust the people.
Yeah.
But then I'll look at it and say,
That or it sounds good. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like and somebody who we do a lot of workforce affordable housing, it doesn't always necessarily sound good, but it is very attractive. Great returns. I mean, and super high demand, low supply, that kind of thing. But especially the doctors and attorneys, like those kinds of types, I think they gravitate to those sexier investments.
right.
And a lot of times with the sexier investments comes lower return, and it's just the supply and the demand. I always think is different. You know what I mean? It's just there tends to be a lot more supply, depending on where you're at, obviously, that kind of thing, of those types of class A and B types apartments and all. But when you get down to the workforce affordable, it's just there's massive supply constraints all over the country, urban, suburban, rural, I mean, you name it. You know what I mean? So it's just I love what you're saying because it's like not everybody I don't, and that's Accredited life to a T. And I mean, it's taking the time to understand where you've come from, because that's gonna that if you take the time to understand who you are and where you come from, that's probably when a lot of those limiting beliefs are gonna rear their heads. You know what I mean? Like that's and then when you start to think about where you want to be, that's when the voice in your head really pops up and says, you can't do that. You're never going to do that. I mean, you're never going to find that. And that's not going to work. And, just play it safe or just do this or just do that. So how the heck do you take somebody, who comes to you, like you said, they're just kind of, they're lost, right? You know what I mean? They know they need to do something different, but they don't know how. What's that conversation look like? What kind of question? I'm assuming you got to ask really good questions, right? You know what I mean? To get them thinking, all that kind of stuff. So just kind of paint that picture for me.
Well, good news is usually they listen to our podcast, so a lot of the mindset stuff shifts even before they talk to us, right? But really the questions are about like, where's your money right now? Like, where is it being held? What locations is it in? 401ks and IRAs? Is it in liquid savings and cash? Is it trapped in equity and properties? And so we're just looking for potential. Really, it's like, where is this money locked up that needs to get out? For example, I had one guy that actually heard me on a podcast with a syndicator, and then he was just like, "Hey, I just met with my financial advisor. I have $1 million in my retirement account. He told me to live on 3%, 3,000 a year, and I can't do that. I'm in California,
True.
and I don't want to be a broke millionaire living in below poverty line."
Yeah.
And so he eventually started following our podcast, and then as we met with him, we started looking at, okay, what is it you really need? Okay, cash flow, income is more the focus. I know you have like an income fund for that very purpose, right? And so he actually got a couple duplexes that are more turnkey duplexes that being managed by a property manager. Yeah, he did actually apartment syndication or two. Even did like oil and gas syndication to get some royalties and things like that, a partnership there. And between all of that, he was cash flowing now over $100,000 a year with that same money, right?
Yeah.
I had another guy who's actually a chiropractor, and his thing was, I mean, he had cash sit on the sidelines, but the thing that was most concerning to me was the equity in his properties. Because in his situation, like he had a lot of equity, and he was again that very much. I have a lot of Asian clients, and Asian clients are like the best model savers you will ever meet, right? Like they are like incredible, and he was no exception to that rule. And so he's like, I got this goal. I have 6 years. I'm going to pay off my mortgage for my house and for my rental property. I was like, okay, cool. Well, when we take out taxes and insurance, you're just going to have to pay that after you're paid it off. What are we really freeing up here? It's like, well, about $4,200 a month. I'm like, okay, that's $50,000 a year cash flow. That could be good. But let's look at this here. You got a lot of equity trapped in your home. You got about $700,000 in this rental property. What's your net cash flow? Like, what's your real profit on this property? $200 a month. And I was like, okay, so you're getting like this 0.3% return on your equity right now. I said, what if we sold that property? Because we talked about refi options, but the one that looked the best when we ran the numbers was really selling it. Like, what if we sold this property 1031 into other properties, especially out east, because he's living out west. And he's like, oh, but I don't know. Like, we really love it. It's our first property. I get that.
God. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, okay, what if you paid off in 6 years? How much rental income will you then gross at this point? $2,400 a month. I'm like, that's still horrible. Like that's $30,000 a year off of $700,000.
Yeah, a big difference, but yeah,
it took me some 2 years, and then he finally says, "All right, I'm going to do it." He bought a whole bunch of properties in Louisiana. Not my first pick, but that's where he ended up going. And with that equity, bought those like 6 properties, kept reinvesting the proceeds, and now it's been roughly about 4 years later since he did this, right? And the crazy thing is, he's now surpassed $100,000 of income off of those properties. Not even, and it would have been till next year that he would have finally paid it off and got the $2,400 a month. And so he actually reached out to me last year. He says, Chris, I get it now. Like, now I'm seeing it. I see what you were saying. Because you had $100,000 by the time you pay off this mortgage if you actually invested in other places. And so that's a thing. I mean, that's what I get excited about is seeing that kind of potential and what you can create. So that's the kind of stuff we do, is just help them strategize. We even have our own network of people we can always refer to and things like that, but we don't take any compensation. That's the one thing that ticks me off, is that there's all these mastermind type groups, and then they're only just usually raising capital for either their own deals, or they only refer you to deals because they get paid.
Yeah.
And that's no different than what I was doing as a financial advisor, right? Like, to me, that's just unethical to do that. So I just tell people, just like yourself, Peter, I'm like, hey, we don't take any compensation, nothing at all. If it looks good, great. We never cross the line saying we become investment advisors, but we do say, sure, look, here's what you can do. And on top of that, I mean, the cool thing is, even as a bonus, is that we even teach them like how to actually use a specific method we've kind of coined and trademarked ourselves, called Max ROI, infinite banking, that we use in coordination with it all. It's not the thing that's the star, but it actually helps add a few extra dollars, and usually cuts down about 1 year towards their financial independence goals, at least.
Wow. And you had said before we got onto this topic, it was lean, liquid, and there was a third, right?
And get out. So get your money out.
Okay. And getting out. Okay. So we did cover that. I wanted to make sure we kind of covered those pillars there, because I liked where you were going with it. Wow. So God, you must be somewhat of a therapist at times, right? It's
Times,
like,
yeah.
right, isn't there, there's a lot of the investor psychology. Should write more books on investor psychology. I work with a lot of investors, raise a lot of capital, and always ask a lot of questions and things like that to understand what's happening in the market. What do people like, what do they not like, what are they seeing, what are they experiencing, all that kind of stuff. And it's just funny sometimes. I mean, like the different thought process people have on stuff. And also it's I got to imagine a lot of your conversations are kind of similar to what you were just saying with that conversation. It's just getting there, right? And it takes time, especially if these thoughts and they're ingrained, right? You know what I mean? So it's anything that you, any suggestions or any kind of help you would provide somebody who's kind of, maybe they're a little bit stuck, you know what I mean? They know that they got to do something, but they're not sure what to do, and two, I think podcasts, as helpful as they can be, can be a detriment too if you overdo it, right? It's like anything.
Yeah.
And it can be overdone, or if you choose the wrong person sometimes, and like you were kind of speaking to the mastermind groups and things like that, you got to look for that agenda, right? I mean, what's their kind of underlying hidden agenda here? I think that's always important to do. So what have you found, to kind of help people to get unstuck and to make that first leap,
The mindset is definitely the toughest part for a lot of people, because once you break past that, the strategy is actually not that hard. It's actually pretty easy. And you have to almost take that parking brake off. That's what most people have. I mentioned about stewardship, right? There's spenders, savers, and stewards. Stewards are actually right in the middle. If you take the best of the spender and the saver, put it into one person, you get a steward. Because the good thing about the spenders, is the fact they're willing to use money. Because money is meant to be used. But they often they usually abuse it rather than use it, right? It's easy come, easy go. And that's why, really 75% of business owners are actually usually in the spender category, while about 75% of employees are savers, right?
Sure.
And so, because obviously there's a different mentality, obviously business owners want to make more money. So the spenders get a bad rap for that, but they're also willing to use money to get a return, which is good. They just have to be wise with it, which is what a saver does. A saver will overthink in many cases and usually go overboard to the point they say they're conservative, but really they're just comfortable savers. What savers are, right? They're not investors. They're not or conservative investors are comfortable savers because they do what the masses do. So for a saver, you have to swing the pendulum towards the spender, or the spender have to swing towards the saver. So if you're a saver, you got to swing more towards, I'm willing to use money and actually get a return and create something now versus storing it away for winter, whenever that winter ends up being. For myself, like I'm some squirrel desperate. And the spenders got to also realize, hey, I got to still think and be more like the saver, be wise with my money. It's like this. I mean, we've heard, the parable of the talents in the Bible, right? You got those 3 servants. They're all given, a sum of money from the master. I always think it's funny when Dave Ramsey rips on debt and says it's not, that's evil in the Bible, but yet Jesus uses debt in that very example of the parable of the talents, right? Because they were borrowing money from their master, and their charge was to go and do something with that money. Well, 2 of them, of course, went out. The one that had 5 sums of money went and made 10. And of course, the master says, hey, well done, thou good and faithful servant. I made you a steward of a few things. I'll make you master of many. Come into my kingdom. The one that had 2 went and made 4. So he doubled his. And of course, he got the same exact reward. The one that had 1 was a Dave Ramsey fan. The one that had 1 buried it. They didn't want to lose his debt, didn't want to lose the money, buried it. The saver pulled it back out of the earth, gave it back to the master at the end. The master was pissed because the master said, listen, I gave you a charge. You're supposed to do something with this. You could have put money changing. You could have made money with this, and you didn't do it. Therefore, get out. I'm going to give you the one that you had. I'm going to give it to the guy that made 10, and you need to get out, right? Yeah. And there's a spiritual implication to that too. But the thing is, spiritual and even the physical world really are intertwined. And when it comes to money, you got to look at money as that way: as how can I use this money to multiply and edify and grow and become something that increases my stewardship? Because that is the charge. We're all here on this planet. We're born with nothing. We leave with nothing. Everything in between is stewardship. What do we do with the resources we have right now to make something greater that doesn't just make our lives comfortable, but it actually allows us to become better stewards? And really, that's why I call the company Money Ripples. It creates that ripple effect.
I like that. Yeah.
Lives through that prosperity.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I like that. I like kind of the mindset that creates. I mean, it just the ripple effect in it. Just it puts you in the right kind of headspace. Because the whatever it is that you're doing, right? If you're in one of those three buckets, it's going to ripple effect throughout your entire life. I mean, and not only your life, but the life of your family and your children, your spouse, and the people around you and all. I mean, so that makes a lot of sense. And God, there was a question floating around, and it escaped me. But what would you? Well, you know what? How much? What do you do to stay up to date with everything that's going on? As somebody who, people are going to come to you and they're looking for what the options are. You know what I mean? Because I think
Yeah.
that's important. I think a lot of people like there's investors that I have where I talk to them and I think I understand their goals. And then they'll tell me, "Oh, I'm doing this development deal or something like that." And I'm thinking,
Uh-huh.
"Well, I didn't see you do it." You know what I mean? Like that's not in line, you know what I mean, necessarily with what I was thinking. And it's kind of like I remember when I got my real estate license, there was a teacher there that said, you're gonna have when you're gonna be showing houses to somebody, and they're gonna tell you they want, the big backyard, so the dog can run around, and they want a basement so their kids can play with it, that kind of thing. And you're going to show them 50 million houses. They're never going to pull the trigger, and you're going to lose touch, and a few weeks or months will go by, and you're going to call them and you're going to say, "Hey, I just thought I'd check in, see how things were going." And they're going to say, "Oh yeah, we bought a house and it's a row home in the city." You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
There's no backyard, there's no basement,
No basement.
it's
Yep.
exactly, but it had that amazing kitchen, or it had a beautiful walk-in closet or something like that. And I feel like that's a good analogy for investors do that too. You know what I mean? Where it's like they want cash flow or they want, but then they get into a value add multifamily that, has a 12 pref, but it doesn't pay. It might not pay, anywhere even close to that. And it's all catch up at the end, that kind of thing.
Yep.
So how do you you need to know a lot, right? I mean, you need
Yeah.
to know what the options are, which is probably somewhat something that you're used to coming from,
Mm.
the regular financial planning world. And there you'd have to know a lot of options and stuff like that. But you were probably given those, right, in some way by the company you work for. They probably trained you and that kind of thing. But this world now, you're out on your own, right? I mean, there's no one source you can go to that has all the options and things like that. So
That's
I'm
right.
just curious to how you stay up with that, because I think for somebody doing things on their own, what I mean, that could be helpful. And then just too, like, I'm assuming depending on what your goals are, there's certain opportunities where it's like you should gravitate towards lending, or you should gravitate towards residential versus gravitating towards, retail or development opportunity, or you name it.
Yeah. No, you're hitting it right on the head. I mean, so the way I actually get most of the resources or the connections, I mean, I've built it up over really the last 20 years, right?
Hmm.
But the resources have really been through connections. Masterminds have been a great way to do that. But not any mastermind. It has to be a mastermind that holds to our same core values. We're very, very big on really having like integrity, right? Integrity, openness, willing to learn and grow from mistakes and things like that. And I tend to attract the same people. Birds of a feather tend to flock together, right?
Sure.
It's amazing because, like I won't mention specific names, but there was a pretty big multifamily commercial syndicator on like every podcast I saw. Like he was probably on just as many podcasts, if not more than me. And I've been on a lot of real estate podcasts. And he's just out there pitching stuff. I remember he had a project in Utah. I was like, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. And the guy only showed up in the investing world in the late 2010s.
Hmm.
They're like, hey, come on, man. They're like, you're just a baby and you're pitching hard. And
Sure.
and the crazy thing is our paths never intersected. I could tell he was a good marketer, but
Sure.
there was something missing. And of course, just like I predicted, I had some clients ask me about it. I said, honestly, the guy doesn't seem to have a lot of experience. He's doing deals that I wouldn't even dare do, and he's doing it at the height of the market.
Hmm.
I would stay away from this guy. And lo and behold, most of his deals went south
Hmm.
badly, very badly. And that's the thing is I have a really good intuition. Like I can sniff out crap really, really well. Two, I tend to stay in groups where they tend to have people that aren't the best marketers, but they have really good integrity, and they're willing to like pay out, really put their family at risk to make sure their investors get paid.
Yeah.
Like that's, you can't teach that. That's like a culture thing, just like in business, right? You can't teach those kind of things. And so finding those people are critical. And that doesn't mean that we haven't had or any kind of, road bumps or losses. But I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, there's a lot of groups I've seen out there that over 50% of their deals have gone south in the last couple of years. We've maybe seen maybe 5%.
Wow.
So that's something that I can't take all the credit. I do have a team as well that helps me with that and kind of I can bounce things off of a little bit more and do extra due diligence on. But for the most part, it's really just those connections. And yeah, I get people coming to me all the time. Most of the time, I just don't even give them the time of day because it's not even that they're bad. It's just that, sometimes there's just things that don't sniff right, or maybe there's just not a need for our group because maybe someone's like came to me for ATM funds, right? We've heard about those starting to go south lately, right? I was telling people like, this is the wrong time to get into ATM. It's going digital. It's the wrong end of the curve to get into it. But man, because it was hot, like you said, they're sexy, right?
Sure.
People went after them. Even doctors and dentists that I knew, accredited investors were going after them because they get the tax write-off, make it 26% returns. Now they're getting no returns and probably no principal and no tax write-off. Well, maybe they have a loss. So that's, but that's not what we want. We want gains, not loss.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So that's the thing is like, it's really about that. And I really see it as a sacred trust. And that's again, why I don't take compensation because I don't want that to sway me because somebody pays, right? I want to make sure that I'm only being paid by the client so that it makes more sense to really see clearly. And I'll tell you, there are times we've had people in our group. There's one guy in particular was a multifamily syndicator that was popular with our group. He even had non-accredited investors invest in his fund. However, he started running out of deals to find around 2021, 2022. He started switching from his quote unquote vanilla deals that he was very, very good with. He's done for years. He knew like the back of his hand. He started switching to what he called his chocolate deals. And those chocolate deals were like, hey, instead of doing multifamily in Alabama, I'm going to do hotel conversions in Phoenix, and things like that. Or I'm going to do a coffee farm, or I'm going to go do another syndicator, or we got to connect people with syndicators saying, hey, we're going to do this Belize, type of deal and all kind of stuff. Like all these things, like, okay, these things you guys have zero business being in first and foremost. You're not even in these areas. Like I know like you're like big on Baltimore, you obviously know Pennsylvania really well. And so like, the market, right? Sure. But if you're all of a sudden to say, you know what, I'm going to go try LA. Like, I'd be like, okay, why don't you guinea pig with your family's money or something like that? Exactly. And come back to me in a decade when you've really like worked out the kinks in those markets, right? Like that's the kind of thing that would be my response.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you going through that because it gives I think it gives the listener a good kind of. Sometimes it's somewhat of the gut feeling, but you have to kind of have the gut, and it seems like you do. You know what I mean? You've been doing it long enough and you've seen enough things, and that kind of thing where you develop the gut over time. But there probably is a part of it where, to your point, the intuition's there. You know what I mean? And it's a common theme I hear. I've always thought it myself personally, but it's a common theme that I've heard a lot in recent interviews where it's like, if somebody's a really good marketer, I hate to knock somebody for being good at something, but if they're a really good marketer, you might want to get a little bit, you might want to start to question, you know what I mean? Like, because it's all the skills you need to execute are typically like my partner Wade, like he's not, and anybody that knows him, I mean, he's not the easiest guy to talk to. And he's a walking spreadsheet. You know what I mean? Like, and it takes time. Like, usually it's like in a conversation with him, it's 10 minutes before he even starts to open up. You know what I mean? Like, he's not a great podcast interviewer. You know what I mean? Like, because it's just like one word answers, I mean, that kind of thing. But then eventually, as he gets comfortable, he opens up, and he's a very smart guy. He's the kind of guy where I like, you know what I mean? Like, I like that, you know what I mean? Because he's very logical, great at the execution side. It's the guys that are really good at the marketing, I almost, because it's like they have no shame, you know what I mean? Like, you hear some of the crap that they pump out, and you just think, how can you say that? I mean, I think Grant Cardone's always a perfect example of, like, you hear some of the clips, and you're like, like, because it gets to a point where you just have to produce content all the time. You know what I mean? And
Right.
it can't be quality if you're constantly producing content all the time. You know what I mean? And that's what you mentioned, the a radio show that you listened to back in the day on the AM, where it was the mindset thing. Sometimes I think that's better because like you can talk mindset all day, every day. You know what I mean? Look at like a Tony Robbins or something. They made a whole career, you know what I mean, talking about mindset, and other guys, Bob Proctor and things like that. It's when you need to talk about the deals and all that kind of stuff. It's just like that's where, and a lot of that's not very sexy content, that kind of thing. The vast majority of the audience isn't even necessarily going to understand it. Probably you could turn people off where they're just hearing a lot of jargon and things like that. But I think because of the world we live in nowadays, where it's LinkedIn and social media has made this space so competitive, and there's so many. I like to joke like the fund to funds managers and like those kind of guys. That's become like the new fix and flip. It's almost easier because you don't have to deal with contractors. You know what I mean? Like you just find a deal, and like I scratch my head sometimes at like what the criteria is for these people. It's like if you've been around for a long time and you have 50 employees or something like that, and it's like they'll raise money and like that, you got to take a little bit of a deeper dive. You know what I mean? Like, and I've worked at companies that have been around for a longer time, and that doesn't equal success necessarily. You know what I mean? Because chances are their staff and what they were built out for was a strategy that was successful a few years ago, and now I want to see how have they evolved. And the bigger you are, it's like it's steering the Titanic. You know what I mean? It becomes a lot more difficult because your whole staff, you've invested a lot of money in a strategy, and real estate evolves over time. So like more so than anything, I think it's great if you show a long track record, but how have you evolved with the times and the market and all that kind of stuff? But just to get back to what we were saying there, I think it's funny. It's like I hate to, and I get those questions. I'm obsessed with communication. I'm the kind of guy when somebody calls me and I'm available, I pick it up. When they text me, even if I can't, pick it up, a lot of times I'll shoot a text. I'm on a phone call, I'll get right back to you. And I've had people say to me, do you need the money? Are you desperate for money or something like that? And it's just like, no, not at all. You know what I mean? Like that's just the kind of guy I am. So I hate, and it bothers, like if something's sitting there and I can get to it, I want to get to it. You know what I mean? Because it's like I know I'm going to have to get to it eventually. And I think too, in this day and age, it is such a differentiator because I hear people tell me all the time, like they'll ask their fund manager, their syndicator, their operator, whatever, a question, and like weeks go by. So it's like it's a way to stand out. And it's important to me. I know it's important to a lot of other people, but it's just funny. Like you hear those kinds of things. So I hate to knock anybody for good marketing, but it's always one of those. I want to see somebody on that team that can really execute as well on the parts that really matter. Not that you need to be well capitalized, so you need that part, but it's the acquisitions, and then it's the business plan. Does it make sense? And you have you kind of made it sound very easy, yeah. But you've been doing it long enough, you probably looked at enough of these things for somebody who's new to the space. You know what I mean? It's just not as easy, right? You know what I mean? It's just sometimes that the gut feeling's not necessarily there. And to your point, it's just like there's like sometimes the marketing thing, well, that's good. And I like the person, I like that kind of thing. But it's like, you need to have a little bit of a gut feeling too on the macro. But I think the micro is important. Like I had a lot of these conversations where people talk macro, but it's like, you got to look too, like in the area. I mean, what's the supply and the demand in that exact area? Cause like office is a perfect example. Like there's office local to me here, like smaller. We were talking about the co-working space that we're in. It's just like the place is freaking packed. You know what I mean? They're kicking butt. There's other
San Francisco, where he's
exactly right. You know what I mean? So you got to look at macro, but you got to look at micro too. You know what I mean? Like there could be deals that make sense, especially if you are an active buyer, investor, and you want to invest in your area and things like that. Sometimes reading the national, the like you said, the CNNs or CNBC or Fox Business or something like that, they're aggregating data from all over the country.
Yeah,
and real estate is very local, right? You know what I mean?
They're always late to the party.
100. Like we were talking about that prior to hitting play here. On the industrial. You know what I mean? It's just like anytime exactly you start to hear about stuff on podcasts and articles and things like that, chances are you're probably late to the party.
Mhm.
and because the price is getting baked in at that point. Because if you heard about it, the owners of those properties, chances are they've heard about it too. And like we were saying before, they're getting calls from brokers. Once that starts to tick up, they know it's like I had a friend who listed something on Facebook Marketplace, and he was like, "I got inundated." I can't remember what it was. It was like something of his parents. It was something like that, and he was like, "I got inundated with all these messages, like, oh, come, I'll pick it up right now,
Uh-huh.
hash, all that stuff." And he's like, so I Googled it, and he's like, "Oh my God, this thing was worth, 10 times what, what I was thinking."
Mhm.
It's funny, but that question that I lost earlier came back to me. What do you think the future of financial planning is? Now you're seeing more and more of a mainstream push to private investment. Family offices are now, ellipsed hedge funds and all. I mean, they're making more investments in private companies and private real estate and that kind of thing. What do you think the future of financial planning is?
That's a great question. I mean, because I still hold licenses, so I still technically, kind of dabble in that world a bit, even though I don't want to. I try to refuse to go to their trainings unless I have to do my every 2-year continuing education, and I can do most of that online. I'll tell you, they really, here's what I realized: financial advising and financial planning, if they wake up to it, the people that are working inside of it, they'll realize they're really just pawns in a larger game. The
Mm.
game is this, is that financial institutions control the financial education.
Mm.
I mentioned the Merrill Lynches and the banks of the world and everything else. They teach you to set your money aside, lock it away, set it and forget it, which is the worst stewardship mantra to use. That's not stewardship. That's a saver mentality, which is also more of a gambler mentality if you do that kind of thing. But they're always like, pack it away, set it there forever. Remember, compounding interest is the eighth wonder of the world, which Einstein never said, but they all love to misquote him about that. And they'll tell you that stuff and leave it in there. And then even when you pull it out, you pull out as little as possible, which is a perfect business model for those financial institutions.
Mm. Sure.
Realize we want to increase our profits, just to convince people to keep their money here, let it grow and accumulate here. And then when they try to take it out, just don't take out as much as the interest that's being earned. So we still keep getting a raise because we take our guaranteed fees all the time.
Mm.
I think what you're going to see in financial advising, you're going to see more of it. I think you're going to see more fee-based planners happening, and they're out there. Unfortunately, it's still they're brainwashed into that kind of mentality, which means that you don't really create a lot of wealth. It's just another person trying to pitch you into mutual funds and insurances and things like that, right? I would love to see more into alternative investments. I've seen a few. I have a few friends in this space that actually do that. I'm not saying that that's their focus, but at least they're more open, saying, "Hey, real estate works for me. I'm willing to tell people to do that too." That's what I'm trying to do. I'm really trying to revolutionize that industry.
Mm.
Not that I'm trying to change it per se, but I'm trying to create another option, right? Where people can look for an alternative investment option and say, "Listen, I got to get somebody that I know they're not just being pulled by purse strings, right? They're not being pulled because, and they've actually been there, done that, and they're still doing it today, right? So I'm teaching from experience. Heck, I had to do it twice, and even the coach that I have on my team, like they do the same thing as well themselves. And so I think I would love to see that happen. I don't think it'll happen on a massive scale,
Yeah.
but I really don't care about changing it on a massive scale. I just care about changing it a little bit,
Sure.
to the point where it allows people another option to see a much brighter future where instead of waiting decades, maybe they can be financially independent in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to some of the points we were talking about earlier, just with the investor's mindset, that business has been so ingrained, right, and to so many people, and there's reasons for it, like you said, with promoting the financial institutions and that kind of thing. It's going to take a long time, man. If you're depending on them to come around to you or something like that, it's going to take a very long time, and if that ever fully get there, right?
Yeah, the financial advisor is just a sales force for those bigger companies, and
Yeah.
and they're going to want to keep growing that as much as they can. And I think there will be a point of inflection, and
Yeah.
I think there will be future collapses. Could be in the near future, could be more distant future, but we're going to see more financial issues, and people are going to be pissed, right? And especially with baby boomers and now Gen X are starting to move to retirement.
Mhm.
And just imagine if the market, which is already way overvalued, it's already 2 standard deviations above where it's supposed to be based on the GDP.
Sure.
That last time that happened was Y2K. And we saw what happened that decade. It actually went down in the 2000s. It didn't go up. It's one of the few decades we actually lost money. And we're at that point again here now in the mid 2020s.
Yeah.
So it's My hope is that people will wake up and move sooner than waiting for the evidence and then losing a lot of cash and then saying, well, now I have less to work with. Now I have to work more years just to become financially free, when they could do it right now at the height of a market that's going insanely overvalued. People are talking about real estate being overvalued. Please. It's not even close to what you're seeing in the stock market, but yet, because people are comfortable savers, they will throw their money in there because the masses are in there. But just because 2 billion people have their money there and lose all their money at the same time doesn't make it the right place.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think that's kind of a good cliffhanger to leave us at, and maybe motivate some people to reach out to you. So, how can people want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you do and that kind of stuff? How can they reach out to you? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, Money Ripples. I mean, look up Money Ripples podcast. We got moneyripples.com. Even the social media is all at Money Ripples. So Money Ripples is the key name right there.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Chris, it was great to have you. Great conversation. I look forward to staying in touch with you. And, we'll share your Money Ripples and all that stuff in the show notes and things like that. So appreciate you being here. Thanks so much, Chris.
Same here, Peter. Thanks.